Let's talk about the normalizing ENFP. What does this subtype look like?
So this is the exact opposite of the creative. And by that, I mean, if you look at those two cognitive functions, extroverted intuition, introverted feeling, extroverted intuition or exploration now takes on the more holistic role. This is the more diffused, a little bit more receptive part. And then the judging function of introverted feeling or authenticity, the co-pilot or auxiliary, that is the more assertive, sort of focused energy. So it is the exact opposite of the creative type. And so you're going to see a very different style of ENFP. This ENFP is a little bit more wired like the norm, right? And so they're going to reflect that in their behavior. They're more patient. Now, of course, you just have to remember that this is in contrast or in comparison to other styles of ENFP. So add the modifier.
We're still talking about ENFP at the end of the day.
Exactly. But these are the ones that come across as patient, reflective, technically adept, traditional, and well-mannered. But they still are charming, right? They're still ENFPs, so they have a more quiet charm, right? And in Linda Barron's vernacular, this would be a little bit more of a chart the course style, right? They're more technical. They're grounded, right? They don't need somebody to ground them. They do it themselves. They're more linear thinkers than other ENFPs. They usually are strongly visual and they're factual, right? So that vomiting rainbow style, an ENFP that is like that is not going to resonate with those kinds of stereotypes at all. They are from all over the spectrum, basically any career path that makes sense, right? To the more normalizing way of going about things. So they could be engineers or lawyers or, sort of computer programmers or soldiers, right? Anything that is a good working member of society. But they're still ENFPs, so they tend to find themselves in the arts still, right? They still have that interest. And so if they do go that direction, it's going to be more technical. So as opposed to the creative subtype, that if they find themselves in a technical aspect, they're going to bring the art. If they're a normalizing and they find themselves in art, they're going to bring a technical aspect, which I thought was really interesting. It's like that's where they meet in the middle.
Yeah.
They rely on certain brain regions to engage in hypothesizing and imagining, but they don't quite have that same starburst that the creative type does. And so they're still going to be interested in brainstorming, but it won't be as second nature to them as the creative. They're going to be quieter, more structured. They'll have a more critical eye than other ENFPs, so they might be a little bit more calibrative than other styles. They have a tendency to lean really hard on designs, templates, structures, and that sort of thing. And they might even feel nervous if they don't have one, though leaning on them is a learned skill, which I thought was interesting. It's not natural for the ENFP to need a template, but once they discover templates, now they feel uncomfortable without them. So this is a very unique sort of phenomena of the normalizing ENFP. They tend to keep a lid on their enthusiasm more than other ENFPs, so they're not as bombastic. They are less random, but they still have that subtle playfulness. They value working with a team. So the creative subtype of ENFPs, I think, is a little bit more solo, right? They kind of want to work on their own. And then the dominant just wants to be in charge. This normalizing understands the value of teamwork. And so they're going to be less resistant to working with groups of people and in cooperation. And they just really like, traditional things, right? They're a little bit more traditionalist. They enjoy families and family traditions and activities that are more mainstream, but it always comes with a twist.
Yeah.
Right? In the INFJ careers, we talked about the normalizing INFJ. We'll almost always have just a piece of information to let you know that they're not exactly what you expect them to be, right? I talked about the accountant with all those different styles of eyeglass frames.
Yeah.
This ENFP is going to have a similar feel, right? They're going to be more normalizing, but there's something about them that is just a little different from everybody else. So it's the same, but with a twist.
I wrote down quirky hobbies next to this type.
Yeah, exactly. And I think another big part of it isn't just interesting hobbies on the side, but remembering that ENFPs are deeply passionate, particularly about crusades. And they're not going to lose that necessarily. They're going to keep that idea of wanting to improve things, wanting to make things better, and being very passionate about the things that mean something to them. So they're still going to have a desire to impact others, impact culture. They'll have that deep passion inside of them that wants to move forward and improve and change things up just a little bit. And I thought Dario I thought it was really astute when he said the biggest contribution can be making something a new standard of tradition that the average person can relate to.
Yeah.
So in some ways, it's almost like this type is a bridge, right? It's a bridge between the usual and the very, very different. This style of ENFP sort of meets in the middle and almost acts like a translator for those two worlds.
So I could imagine this style of ENFP is the most likely to mistype as maybe a judger, a censor, somebody that is not very ENFP at all. If they tend to be wired this way, it might, or just expressing this way, it might give a false read on the style of ENFP may not read ENFP in like a typing session or a profiling session, something like that.
Yeah, I actually think this is probably a very common mistype. Mm-hmm. I could see the style of ENFP mistyping as an introvert, as a censor, as a thinker, or as a judger.
Yeah.
It's all over the map because we just don't think of this style of ENFP, and yet there they are.
Let's talk about some of the careers that would lend themselves to this style. Now, like you said, the dominant ENFP is most likely going to want to either start something or be at the top of something. They're very comfortable with hierarchy, especially being at the top of the hierarchy and preserving the system, leading the system, quite frankly. The creative is much more likely to need a platform, kind of ancillary to the structures. They want to live in solo land, be creative, be expressive. They need a platform or somebody to support them. This normalizing ENFP, and by the way, the neurotransmitter is serotonin, is the preferred neurotransmitter chemical. This ENFP is more okay with hierarchy, but not necessarily needing to be in charge. Probably very comfortable plugging themselves into an organization, a system, a nonprofit, a business, a corporation, and working a regular job or working a career path in a normal way, working up the career ladder. So with that in mind, let's talk about some of the possible career choices this style might want.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so these careers, again, they're not comprehensive, but they might give you a little bit of an idea of how a normalizing ENFP or the directions they go. And this is, this is going to reflect the more patient style, the more technically adept element. It will allow them to capitalize on that little more of that organizational skill and team player mindset. But I think it's also, these are places where ENFPs can have that impact of changing the standard. Yeah. So I think that's why these ones made the list. They are civil engineer, architect, software developer, financial planner, environmental scientist, technical writer, urban planner, data analyst, industrial designer, nutritionist, operations manager, web developer, mechanical engineer, information systems manager, and speech language pathologist. Right. Which is very interesting because I actually know an ENFP who's a speech language pathologist.
There you go.
Yeah. So I think, again, these are not the kinds of careers that you normally would throw the direction of ENFP. It's not like the actor or the entrepreneur. But you could really see an ENFP heading these directions and making a big impact, right? Yeah. Being able to make changes from within, not just, necessarily altering things from without.
It's important, though, that they do have some kind of a hobby, something that lets them have that intuitive, creative outlet. If you're an ENFP that you are identifying with this normalizing subtype, you also might need some creative, intuitively focused people to have conversation with, brainstorming sessions with. People that you can, outside of work or outside of the career you're in, have your back around unlocking some of that intuition, some of those quirky parts of you, some of the interesting elements of the creativity you bring. It's very needed outside of work, I think.
Well, and what's interesting is that for other types, the normalizing, those hobbies were so important. I think actually, interestingly enough, for the normalizing ENFP, it's impact. I think even more so, I agree, they need to have people they can have those brainstorming conversations with. But I think what really lights them up is knowing that they are able to have that impact, that they're actually changing things for the better, that they're altering standards. And so if they're unable to do that in the career, then this ENFP might need to find nonprofit or volunteer, opportunities to have that impact.